and welcome to Stop Now, a social experiment where we stop, listen, and share. I'm your host, Nate, and we are so glad that you were able to join us again for another episode of our conversation. And joining me as always is my right-hand man, the man in the mask, the voice of the voiceless, JK. JK, how are you today?
I'm good, Nate. Since this month going to be a Human Trafficking Awareness month, I kept this banner as such instead of my mask being the face of a voiceless victim. And it's nice to connect back again. And this week we are welcoming our returning guest, Christina Taft. And it's so awesome to meet her again. We are going to open up a different Pandora box, I believe. She has a lot of information. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks so much for welcoming me. Really happy to be here and supporting this month too.
Yes, we're so glad to have you back. For those that caught you last time, it was almost exactly a year ago. I want to say it was in February last year that we had a chance to sit down and talk to you and really get into kind of the work that you've done and the things that you're passionate about. So I'm so glad we had a chance to reconnect here in 2022, Christina. I guess we can kind of start there. You know, from the last time we spoke, what's been going on with you? What's been going on with the work that you've been doing?
Right, so back then it was a lot more theoretical and kind of just like saying in general, but now we've actually done a lot of analysis. We actually have gone through 6 platforms and really analyzed details like say accounts posting the same thing like 50,000 times, like say on this adapt and survive video at timings, and like really like digging into graphs and understanding how to visualize it for people.
And would you say with the analysis, is there maybe a common theme that started to develop once you started digging into these numbers?
Yeah, there are a lot of banned accounts, and there are a lot of accounts that just say kind of similar things within similar timings within seconds. So that was definitely apparent. So like Reddit has over 5,000 banned accounts. They don't, unlike other platforms, they don't remove the contributions from those accounts. So then you can go through and see how they're getting a lot of like upvotes, and there's a lot of, a lot of coordination, but also there's just, very suspicious anomalies everywhere.
So when we're talking about, whether it's social media or whether it's, any of these kinds of technology that we use, especially now during the pandemic, to interact with folks and to, have conversations and share ideas and debates and things of that nature. One of the things that kind of popped off last year was, what are the companies doing, in terms of better, I wouldn't say police, their sites, but maybe better curate the sites would be a good word to use. Christina, can you tell us a little bit about that, about what these sites are doing or what they could be doing, to create a better experience for folks?
Right. So I started like kind of social media for good with Realty, even though it's not super active. We have a lot of partners and a lot of support for it. It's just really progressive kind of in this time period where a lot of platforms, if they're separate from the main ones, they start to get labeled as, something on a political side or something, but we're actually very progressive more than the platforms. So that's kind of like what I'm doing with that. And then also specifically the past year, we've started looking into AI, machine learning, and data science more. So like what's underneath these platforms. And so every platform, like say, whether it's Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, change.org, were kind of like the platforms that we looked at. They all pretty much have similar columns and like information on accounts and what's going on their platforms. So they all, they're all kind of talking to each other, I guess, when they were building in Silicon Valley. And so they all just kind of, pretty much replicated each other's information and what they show on their websites. So with like machine learning coders like Udacity graduates or people in machine learning and like data visualization and data analytics, they're able to really like start digging into what these accounts and postings and natural language processing was really about. So this is kind of like the stuff that like say Facebook workers might be looking at, like graphs of what's going on their platform behind the scenes and things like that. So it's more like social network analysis. And so then that really taught us more about what these platforms are doing and actually getting more respect in that part of the tech world.
Mm. And I'm wondering, Christina, in terms of, and this might not be a question that speaks to the data that you've compiled, but maybe maybe you can just kind of give me your personal insight on this, because I've been curious why certain sites seem to hit at certain times. Like I'm old enough to remember when MySpace was a big thing, and it came and went. Then Facebook, and it feels like right now it's Twitter's moment right now. A few years ago, Vine had a season. Is this just an organic thing in terms of people's taste changing, or do you think that there might actually be a science behind what sites attract people at a particular moment?
I think it's more so like how the websites were developed and how like the co-founders and things like that were well connected in their groups. And I think that kind of has more of a sway than say these other platforms that suddenly come up, but they're kind of being politically pushed out there. So like MySpace, they probably were too early so that they weren't like in the group, because they kind of like Reddit became popular around 2011. YouTube started in 2005, but it became popular around 2008. Twitter became popular around 2009, and Facebook was around there somewhere. It's harder to study Facebook because of the way they close their APIs, but and Instagram too. But they all kind of like came around the same time, and then they became popular like a few years later after they were created, kind of thing. So. And so they all just kind of like talk to each other and everything. So often they like one worker will start to work at one platform and then they'll work at another platform and kind of switch around. Like we actually had an ex-Google intern that helped us with change.org and was able to pull all of the milestone data, all of the comments, 28,181 petitions, and really get into the like details of it. So we really had to go like further because we had such a high threshold to look at this. So I've been looking at the Amber Heard case example, which is really, it's very out there, and especially English speaking countries, it's very hard to get people to start looking at it. So we actually had to start like with Italy and with other like countries like UK or European or whatever, to start looking at it deeper in other places, because here it was too much like, oh, if we just even look at all, then they're showing a bias, but actually it's just data. So you look at the data, there are the numbers, it's very obvious. It's just you had to start.
Was there something that surprised you, going through the data? Was there something that maybe you had a theory about something and maybe it was disproven, or something that you didn't expect to come out of the data?
Yeah, so when we first started looking in April, so this was like a couple months, or April, March, couple months after speaking to you, with the Italian cyber intelligence researcher. So he actually gathered 3 platforms of information. So that's based on their high level over there. But it was just really surprising how many accounts. So then it really started to become apparent, like this isn't just these weren't just like hate groups or misogynists or whatever. Like they were actually like, it was a company, because it was such high volume, like thousands upon thousands of accounts, and every day more accounts, and like very like on peak days, then there are botnets that he found. He like found 4 botnets, which I could show screenshots of, but I have to go in and start digging for it. But Arsenal accounts, movie network accounts, like weird mentions and things. And so it was just like really interesting. And then Twitter's actually really easy to study because there's like bot meter, there's a lot of research papers. So a lot of people really start with Twitter, and then it was kind of like, well, we need to go further and go beyond just Twitter to cross platform, because that's when you start to see like in, their level, like say Ben Nemo works at Facebook, and he says there's like different 6 categories of influence operations. So like when it starts going past like core platforms, it starts getting into mainstream media, it's high profile amplification, which it was since the beginning. And then there's calls to violence, then that's like category 6. So it's really high up there. So we had to actually go in there and really like show evidence that it's to that level. Yeah.
Christina, a quick question on that. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I read that this year or 2021, surpassing the Google, TikTok become the most popular website in the world, most visited website. So on that account, I'm just making a crazy conspiracy theory kind of thing. Is China taking over the United States?
I think it's mainly like a PR thing. Like, I don't really believe it. Like from the beginning, it seemed like they had fake view counts and like fake, like, because they're just really high very quickly. So I don't really even think that they're like organic. Like, I think that they're just really like pushing out, views and pushing out like getting in the media, like, because someone else under those comments of that article that you mentioned, they said that actually it was in the top 70 or something on a different list. So it depends on what like list you're looking at. And so, it's kind of like a PR thing that they're just like pushing out there. And I did that with my website too. Like I put in fake likes, and it immediately like people respond, like they just keep posting, because then they don't need reaffirmation from other people. Is based on participation. So the more that they posted or logged in, then they get more likes and more fans or things like that. So it really works, and I think they understood that, and they just like put it out there, because China actually has a lot of bots. Like they have a lot of IPs and bot creators. There was this one Chinese coder that had worked at an Instagram influencer company, and so she had like 1,000 IPs, and so and she worked at that company crawling all those accounts and getting it on there, because you have to use bots with Instagram. You can't use APIs pretty much most of the time. So there's CrowdTangle, but it only does so much. So like they got all of those all the information, so they understand social media pretty well. Yeah.
I think, Christina, one of the things that I took from our last conversation back in February 2021 was when we left off. I believe the mood, I would describe it as cautiously optimistic, that you had when it came to the application of AI and the application of this technology and the evolution of social media. So I'm wondering, through your analysis over the past year, have you been given reason, maybe to be more optimistic, or is there maybe a reason for concern with some of the statistics that you've seen?
Yeah, actually, I got pretty optimistic about Frances Hogan. She kind of like is on the same brainwave as I am, and she was even hired to the same civic thing that I was, and I just left the second day because I didn't like what they're showing case examples about women. So like she was on the same brainwave, but she actually was higher up and, actually more in there. So I was actually pretty hopeful when I saw that, and, that she got seen everywhere. So that was good. And then also YouTube removed their dislikes. And I actually had reported a year ago, back in December 2020, the Amber Heard's 22 takeaway, adapt and survive video, because in this cryptic way they were, and this was way after the announcement that 12 out of 14 incidents of violence were true in the media. So this was like a month and a half later. So it also shows synthetic than if it just suddenly appears out of nowhere on some video that doesn't even talk about it. So except for adapt and survive. So 50,000 comments of victim this, or it's that. I just don't want to amplify the message. But then he report to bots, as he said, the Google AI lead, and that they take it seriously, but he didn't see it as gender violence, so like violence against women. And so we see that a lot with the tech world, is that they don't see like subjective things. They don't see like pain. Like if there's pain, they want the data, like the numbers and the evidence and the forensics and things like that. Like they want data analytics, they want graphs, they want high amounts, like thousands of accounts. They don't just want like 10 accounts, they want like thousands of accounts. Like data science is really tough to like get attention in that. So I started to learn that. And another, the ex Google intern, he had been at Google Research before, and he had a friend that had issues with natural language bots over in Europe. And they only went so far as abusive process, but they didn't know social network analysis. So like, unlike what we're doing, we're doing social network analysis. So I'm also kind of like teaching people about how to like gather all this information and start to prove that these are bots too. Because a lot of people, I guess as Hogan was saying, a lot of them just work at the companies and then they're under NDAs. And so then they can't like go out and tell their knowledge to people, or they just don't want to. But more on the product management or the project management side, like she was, you're more responsible for translating what the researchers and coders are doing to someone who isn't, and to each other. So it's a different area. And so them removing the dislikes, there was 497,000 dislikes on that. And they always, made fun of the ratios to try to make it seem like you can't survive. But it just, the more I'd see, I just get really angry because I'm in tech, so it would provoke me. And I would just get really upset, like ratios and stuff like that. Like, I mean, a lot of people take statistics too. And so, but the fact that they just removed it from the whole website, I wasn't expecting that. So I think they really did see there was a lot of inauthentic activity on that video and others, because there were some others. There was Gully, there was 92,000 dislikes on that, and no one even knows what Gully the movie is. It doesn't even make sense. And then also a settlement video, a lot of dislikes on that too. So it definitely shows that it was coordinated. And so they actually moved it even on the API too. So we only got like 6,892 videos with the dislike counts. But but it took like a year, but still, I mean, that's still good. The comments are still there, and they haven't come out saying, yeah, we saw inauthentic activity. They said it was abusive, which Digital Label also had reported the video. So they're like a UK organization against cyber abuse and stuff like that. And they know like the effects on people are really bad. Yeah. So the volume was just really high, like, really, really high volume.
And that might be something I was going to ask about something political, and we can get there in a second, Christina. But, when you talk about the abuse, and maybe it's just that these stories are being amplified. Maybe they've always been existent, but I can think just off the top of my head of at least 5 or 6 stories of, kids or young people over the past year that were cyberbullied and unfortunately, chose to take their lives. Is that something that, like, what can be done about that, I guess, would be my question to you, in terms of, there's always the balance of freedom of speech with also, you've got to protect people. Like what can be done about stories like that?
Yeah, so it's a higher standard, which is a lot harder like in the US, and that's where these platforms are. And I think I mentioned that last time too, a year ago. But what they really have to do is they can't just be like, this hurts, because that doesn't count in data analyst view or like the technologist view or the platforms. They just want to see the numbers. So they would really kind of like Hogan, like sitting there exposing thousands and thousands of pages of research, which would have just been kept internally. They have to do the research projects with like thousands and thousands, but they can't keep it private. I mean, even with I'm going to post the GitHub next month, I still have to get more of the data and analysts on it. It's not going to be totally complete with everything, of course, but you also can't just keep it to your research team or just keep it to your company or organization, because there's a lot of like data out there. Like there's this Amnesty International related one, but then requested and they like didn't respond. So like you can't just keep the data like closed in your box either, because then others who can make a decision, they're not ever going to see it. No one's going to know how data science works, like how hard it is. You have to have like 30,000 posts labeled is like nothing to them in terms of like describing sexual harassment. Like Metaspace was one company that got our data on Amber Heard, and because it's related to abuse against women and stuff, and there actually is a lot of sexual harassment in there too, especially on Reddit. But you know, you have to like give it out there. You can't just keep it all. Of course, you have to be protective because there are people that will exploit it, as we know, with the bots and the operations of disinformation and stuff, because then it makes it easier for them to you know, start to cut their teeth on certain people, and then they're just like, then it's easier for them to create it against someone else because then they already made their systems. So that's why they start also kind of sounding similar on different operations and different, you know, stuff like that. They get specialized towards certain people. But yeah, I am more, you know, for the whole thing about them that happening. And I remember being in the content review room and they're just like, sorry, I had to look at that or whatever, of, you know, some posting about that. They're really not empathetic there. And you know, you have to keep that in mind, is that they want evidence. And so if you don't like research the evidence and really like go in there and give the numbers that just blow people away, then they don't respond. So they're just going to keep spending on other topics and different things. That's just the way they are. So
and you know, talking politically, Christina, you know, I want to say we got into it maybe a little bit last time because it was a few weeks after what happened in January 6th. And a lot of that was driven by some of these social networks. And so when we talk about, you know, maybe these extremist groups or maybe these hate groups, or, you know, however you want to categorize some of these type of thoughts, you know, we also over the past year saw, you know, places like Parler kind of pop up and fade away. What do you think is being done right when it comes to kind of weeding out some of that stuff, and what do you think there's yet to be done in terms of, you know, again, we want people to have the right to exchange ideas, but there's also a line where it's like, now you're actively promoting violence, you're actively promoting hatred. You know, how do we work on that?
yeah, so my opinions, I mean, I know it's wrong since the beginning, but then also because of this project, I also see like the more layers of it, and kind of like what they're, you know, the other side is that, you know, they want the actual numbers. And then also I see that there's a lot of politicalization of what they're looking at. So they're only looking at certain like case examples that are on their political side. Like say I just saw like center of you know, a counter digital hate, you know, I think that's what they're called. But, you know, they say 100 accounts were deleted that were misogynist. But then when you look at who they're focusing on, like say it was one of the top United Nations, or like Mustafa, I think is her name, and then Hillary Clinton and some others. And I'm guessing the rest of the list is going to be pretty political, but you can't do that. Like at the other end, like say safeescape.org, they're actually, I found them finally, they're actually against domestic abuse of women, and they try to do mobile forensics and do some OSINT, so like looking at profiles, but very small scale because they don't have really large, you know, machine learning systems or code that I really focus on like I had to do, because it's really high level. It's a lot of accounts, and every single day they don't end. It's like whatever, endlessly fund it. But you know, that side is that they get really mad because the like to say the cyber intelligence or the threat analysis people, so those are the people are looking for threats or like death threats or human trafficking or crime. Like we did that kind of filter because a lot of the stuff in Amber's data, it relates to crime or abuse or, you know, related to human trafficking as women or things like that. And so then it pulls up all this stuff, like all these things like threats like burn her or whatever, and so their end is they're more conservative a lot of times. So then you have these conservative cyber security people, and then you have these like super these other people, like say the organizations that are just like picking social network analysis, and they're just looking at elections, or they're just looking at certain people on a certain political spectrum, like say on the left or something, and they're also not controversial. So say like they won't look at Amber Heard even though she's progressive, because it has to do with domestic abuse, which might appear to be more on the right sometimes because it's more crime related. So then they don't want to look at the crime. But if you look at the crime more, like if you try to combine these sides more and like relate to crime, then it's more likely to cause a response to them to change it. And so, we've always been more like rescue public safety kind of, viewpoint of it. But, they're just not connecting. These different groups aren't figuring it out, like, because they're so viewpoints are different.
Right.
And so then it's not connected.
Yeah, on that note, Christina, that's one thing. Like, so where does this go forward, like in terms of these National Human Trafficking Awareness Month and those different agencies fighting for different causes? Actually, are they going to create some impact, or is it like just some noise in the social media platform, which is not solving any of these problems that exist?
Yeah, for the social network analysis, like when I tried to, so in the summer of last year, I really emailed hundreds of different academics and experts and organizations about the Amber Heard issue. And, a lot of them didn't reply, some did, but, they were all pretty much looking at politics and like COVID or things like that. So then they weren't looking at victims on the internet. And so from what I see is that a lot of the social network analysts, they're looking at more like broader things that are about like specific victims. The white helmets thing is one thing, like that's specific, but then also it's funded by, it was funded by the Air Force or it's funded by DARPA. And so they're not connecting like say the military social network analyst projects, and then the more OSINT or like cybersecurity, like close-up forensics, mobile forensics, they're not connecting that against crime and abuse. They are a little bit more in other countries, like Portugal mentioned, like there's a professor I talked to there that was in the anti-crime unit there, and so they were doing some more social network analysis. The Italian one, he had been looking online for about disasters. So like some countries and regions, they have a bit more social network analysis. Bodyguard AI, which I talked to as well, but they weren't good at classifying the stuff against her at all. But they're talking to the Senate in France before Olympians and stuff. So they're also influencing that country as well to care more about abuse online. But yeah, the human trafficking thing is interesting because there aren't many social network analysis studies, or there are none, specifically about gathering all the data about human trafficking or crime and abuse, like, or domestic abuse. There's like nothing. Or like the first ones about really this domestic abuse issue, and it's really high volume.
Going through, go ahead, JK.
No, I was going to ask, like, in that case, like, for example, even for us, it was a struggle, right? To the last 1 year, building our YouTube channel itself, it took a lot of struggle. We have to kind of hire like a freelancers or experts, how to promote the channel, how to do the SEO thing. And even YouTube often, right? Even for a small bit of music or something we play out, they flag it as a copyright claim, or if anybody reports it, then it is not suitable for. We are lucky enough, I would say, like within a year we were able to reach the stage where we are monetizing our videos. So what is the ball game in this with AI and these platforms controlling everything that you do?
Yeah, the copyright thing, yeah, it doesn't seem fair when you're trying to go against crime or abuse and they're flagging you. But that actually happened with one of my other channels too. So like often domestic violence, like there was this one channel on Motivator Network where it was showing three guys stopping a husband beating his wife or whatever and chasing him in the parking lot, whatever. But they went and, they kind of like put a censor on it. So then it's age restricted.
Mm.
And I saw that pretty quickly. And so I think there's also issues internally with the company. So like Ashley Gavoric, there are some other whistleblowers that came out towards the end of last year, and she was at Apple, and she saw like Mr. Bullets, I guess his name was something else. She mentioned it recently. I tried to look it up. I didn't see anybody because sometimes these people at tech companies, they're like, they don't have a profile or whatever. But like they're in the company and they're like harassing other workers in the tech, and they're like at the executive level. And so also at the same time, when they're not getting rid of discrimination, and they recently passed that law in California about the NDAs that you can't use it to hide discrimination or abuse and things like that, even at tech companies. But, when they refuse to pass laws, like they just keep bringing the founders or the CEOs in front of Congress, they're not going to get any answers. Like their only reason to start to get answers because when they brought Hogan, she was lower level and she was a product manager. So like when they're not going in there and they're actually not talking to other workers and they're not inspecting, they're not like looking at the training materials, they're not really looking at what they're doing, and they don't feel like they have any responsibility or anything about social effects, and they refuse to put the research out there, then it's really hard to get them to like get rid of crime or abuse more, because they just see just easier to just ignore it, and they try to pretend that there's no tools out there to really look into it. And so we're also kind of showing people like observers and things too that you can actually look into the data and find all these threats against someone, and you could delete it in their system, but they're not doing it.
So would you say like that would be one of your bigger concerns going through the data that you compiled, or was there something else through the analysis where you're like, this is either a problem right now or it could be a problem going forward?
Oh, you mean like if there's like violence in person at a trial? Yeah, that's what really has been scaring me since the beginning, because like obviously when it's category 6, it's like calls to violence, and they did threaten her last summer, the summer before, in person, and that was even before the adapt and survive thing, and the 2021 even more going on there too. And this was after coercive control was made illegal around November in California. But if they don't have precedent cases, they don't have systems set up to look at it, like say Scotland does, they made it illegal in 2015, then they're not going to like do anything about it. And so there's actually there's like someone in LA that was mentioned to me where her ex hired Charlie Sheen, the same lawyers that Charlie Sheen used. And so like it's like really hard for them compared to other states, because they're just using really high profile lawyers and stuff like that. So it's really hard to get the companies to change. And I think it really requires people spending, like myself or others, on these research projects and trying to collaborate. Not everyone's paid. Some are, then to really put it out there and put it at a higher level than just entertainment or some guy like with a hood on a computer. I mean, this is like 40 years old. They're not really hoods. They're getting paid a lot of money. They're probably like sitting there eating great food. They get paid a lot at these companies. And for these operations, they get paid a lot too. So they're not like sitting there with the hood on the computer.
Yeah, I think the Hollywood stereotype is kind of like what folks go to in their mind, but you're right. Like this is big business.
They make a lot of money on it. Yeah.
I think JK was laughing because he's got a hood in his picture. Was that why you were laughing, JK?
Yes. I was trying to turn off my picture as such. Uh, so I still recollect that like it's kind of a matrix resurrection, right? So the new episode kind of thing. How does this Facebook renaming of into Meta is kind of going to impact the world and what they are trying to do in this AI VR space? If you can talk about that.
For me, so I mean, I guess they were planning it since 2015. They're always trying to buy like virtual reality companies. Like,
Mhm.
I remember when I was trying to help Aiden Financial Corp, like they had been offered because they could put games on the browser, and they have a headset where it could read your thoughts basically and try to play a game or a drone. But kind of like what Musk is doing with his project. But like, they've been doing this for a long time, but then of course they did it right when Hogan went to Congress and stuff. But as I was saying, like it's really hard to connect what's going on to like crime and abuse and actual like what the effect is, and to the level that they want. Um, but yeah, the whole meta thing is, I'm not thrilled because I don't look like Zuckerberg. I'm not a man like Zuckerberg, so I don't want anything to do with it, because it pretty much is just, promotes him, like, his demographic and who he is, like this white male demographic. And that's the only thing that can really thrive on Facebook. So I don't like it. Yeah.
Look, I'm glad you went there, Christina, because that was going to be one of my questions. Eventually, like in terms of just the field of data science and sort of the makeup of the people in this field. Like, what would you say if there's a young woman out here watching, or a young person of color who is watching, and it's like that's what I want to do. Like, what advice would you give them in terms of coming into the field and also kind of doing things the right way, I guess?
Yeah, so throughout all of this, I've also done a lot of like networking and looking around at who's out there. And so there's Joy that made the documentary Coded Bias, and so she is pretty admired. There was an ex-Google AI researcher that she was fired from Google because she brought up issues of discrimination, in their code. And so then she's starting to make her own institute and things like that. So I think it's very important for people to like, continue. I also work with Code Your Dreams, which is in Chicago, and they influence people from disadvantaged backgrounds around Chicago, and to like try to make tech that is community, helps the community, or at least inspire them to build it. I think it's very difficult because there's a lot of discrimination in the companies of tech, and so it makes it really hard to like get anywhere. Like, Facebook actually tried to recruit my board member David 4 times and give him a E6 level 500K job. And it's like, I made Roldy, I did all this AI machine learning project, and he even said that in a review. But as soon as he gave that review, they did it again. Like, they're just so like, they just really have that strong club. It's like the worst. It's worse than commercial real estate. It's worse than financial sector. It's worse than legal sector. It's like really, really bad in tech and AI, machine learning, social media. It's like really intense how they really, and I even had a best friend, and he's of that demographic, and he went and worked there, and he's still working there, and he gets paid 65 an hour working on, he was one of the 11,000 that was hired for the VR. I mean, they just really like go after white men or men in general. So if they're a woman of, it's just a lot harder. It's like really, really bad. So.
And I took me a second, because like just hearing that story, about them trying to recruit David like 4 times, and it's like, well, I'm right here. Like I can definitely understand. Like that's just wild. it shouldn't. It should surprise me, Christina, but it kind of doesn't, because yes, like this is how a majority of the business world is made up. And then as you mentioned, specifically when you're talking about the tech industry, it can be very same, I guess is the word I would use when you're talking about these positions. And so that's why I love that you talked about coding your dreams and things of that nature, and pointed out some great examples of women in the field, because I do feel like that's the only way maybe things get more balanced, I guess would be the word I would use, is if you have more voices at the table.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, you can see that tech is very much used for power. And so it, like, we know that from the beginning, but if they don't, start to put in regulations or some kind of like discrimination check, or something, what are you gonna, it's just gonna keep being like this, kind of like taking us backwards instead of going forward. But at the same time, we're all interconnected. So of course we still go forward anyways. But at the same time, like they're trying to push us back, like trying to pull us back too. So but that's how we feel. Yeah. And he's actually interesting, and enough, David keeps declining because he's Native American. He's more interested in rescue, and he already worked at a company called Wicker, and they weren't happy. And so he doesn't want to work at another company where they're very unhappy. Like everyone agrees, like Facebook workers are very unhappy, but they're very well paid. Yeah.
So a gilded cage, some would say.
Yeah. Very well paid, but unhappy. Yeah.
Yes. But I do think right there, one of the things you just said, Christina, is very interesting to me. And then kind of looking back at the last year in particular, where so many, well, I guess even the last 2 years, where so many folks were more dependent on technology than ever before, it does feel like the more we move forward with what technology can do, in some ways, the more we regress to kind of antiquated ways of being people, whether you're talking about some of the misogyny or the racism, or, a lot of these ideas that you would think we would be past by this point, but it's, instead of technology allowing that to be a thing of the past, it's just in some cases accelerated the access of the misogyny, of the hate. And so I'm wondering, like, is there, we've kind of talked about it all show, but like, what do you make of that? Is it something that is just human nature, that it's always going to come out regardless of the medium that you're using?
No, it's definitely based on like what they're focusing on to study and get rid of. I mean, there was a thing like I did, let's say I tried to bring up a year ago, like to Hackers Tribe in India, and then now he's attending Carnegie Mellon University, and they started to do a abuse flagger, but then at the same time they stopped working on it like almost right away, because it's just very hard to get them to finish projects and to do enough high volume. I mean, it costs a lot. And when you're also spending, like, say, even on my project, on things that, it costs a lot to make kind of anti-abuse analysis, or even like bots that, I also talked to a top AI researcher, Shane Mulligan, who is one of the top, like, I think in the world, because GitHub wants him and others. And he was able to make 10,000 compliments on Amber Heard based on Jason Momoa in just like 2 hours. And they're very articulate. They're more articulate than I am, and probably like most people, but it's just like very like, very good. And it explains the density of, bots on Twitter and stuff like that, or Facebook, how they're able to say a lot of text very quickly and very succinctly about the same topic. And they kind of go on the same theme, but then they just kind of keep going on and on about it. But the thing is, like, when we start talking, then we start thinking, and I inspired that compliment generation prompt, actually. And so when you start talking in the tech for good world, like, and you start kind of collaborating more with other social enterprises and researchers, you have a very different effect and like what's out there, and you actually can become popular, like TikTok or something, if you just really like, even if you sympathize, what people are feeling, like if they're feeling better, actually, if they feel better, they actually are addicted as well. It's the same kind of effect as, they say nicotine, but the issue with that is it's a high fall effect, and they're doing that a lot with the punishment, like don't post now, don't do that. Like that's the whole like sudden drop, in happiness, and then that keeps them locked because they feel like they have to stay on the platform, otherwise they don't exist or whatever. And I haven't been on Facebook in a while, and I can't make an account. Actually, David actually can't either, I think because of his affiliation with me, but doesn't stop them from trying to recruit him. But but
point, what you said, Christina, yeah, that is exactly what is happening even in our experiment lab. We are conducting some experiment, as you pointed it out. Recruiters are crazy enough to come after somebody. Like even we created a fake profile for Nate, and hundreds of people like sitting in India, and they are trying to recruit him like no matter what in billion-dollar companies. They represent saying that like somehow like we'll put you through and get you an interview and you can get the job like for $100 per hour, something like that. So how is that? I don't know. It's a fair question. Or how is this business model thriving so much? Is it just because of this billion-dollar companies providing the legal loophole and supporting people to do whatever they want? Or I'm still puzzled. Like we are shocked and we don't know how to even disclose those information because many are like very sensitive.
Oh, so you're asking why the platforms are so popular or they're so well used? Well, it's because of how much data they have in their databases. So once they start collecting all this information, I mean, there's really no going back. So even with mine, like I figured out, people were interested in trying to stop abuse on the current platforms, then you can't make a new platform because unless you're hooked into a government database or something, or like some really strong funding, you can't do another platform. It just not going to happen. And you can't hold all that space. Like it's just so much space, like videos and photos, it just costs too much. So like they're definitely, they're there, and because they have so much data, and so they're never going to like go away. MySpace was just a fluke with that because they were just in the beginning, and I don't think they're hooked up like that because they're more about music or whatever. But when you get so much data, it's like, and then also they also restrict the data. So if you're trying to look at it like a platform filter, which was I'd like to do, but it's hard and expensive. I spend a lot on it, but less in comparison to say the companies. But they also limit data. So like cross-platform posting, or like, the tweet deck can post onto the website whenever you want. You don't have to look at it or something. It's kind of like they limit, sharing of data, and they do it in a certain way that it, promotes their platform. And so, I mean, they're not, that's it. Like it's, but in a different way than say like what other people are just trying to reprimand them or be like, do this or that without actually doing any laws or anything. Like that's not going to work. But if you do like start looking at showing how you can filter abuse out and you start like picking it apart, I think you can change it more. It's just, another level, because then you start to realize you can't just do another platform. That's, it's just not going to happen. So
I think the two things we've learned as we begin to kind of wrap things up this week, and I'll kick it over to JK here in a second, is number one, like there is a lot of work still that needs to be done in terms of making this better. And I think you've done a great job, Christina, with kind of breaking this down for us this week. The second thing that I think we've all come to agreement on is that MySpace was pretty great. And it died too early. It died too early. RIP pour one out for MySpace. But JK, do you have anything to ask Christina about before we wrap things up this week?
Yeah, Nate. MySpace even a thing? I don't even remember.
Let me tell you, like you could like
I'm
your
just
friends, your friends would fight to be in your top 8, and it was and you could play little music clips like MySpace, and you could like I think, and maybe this is a stretch too far, Christina, but I know at least 2 or 3 of my friends that like MySpace was the first place where I maybe learned how to code is too strong, but that's how they kind of got into it because you could change the fonts and change the colors and stuff on MySpace.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of that kind of viewpoint, like say, even if you look at the 1970s, there actually had AI and bots back then. Like it's called the anthology, UDL anthology, and you go back, you'll see 1970s even natural language, and I guess Carnegie Mellon, like with their projects, they were looking at social network analysis in the 90s. But yeah, I think I was actually in Silicon Valley in San Jose for a year and a half, and I remember going to a bar and they weren't playing music, and a lot of that, why don't they add, Spotify? They have it on Teslas, but they don't have it on, say, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram where you can add music, and it's very simple. I have it on my website. You can add Spotify on there, but it's very slow because I put the wrong language on there. React, it should be in React, which was made by Facebook, and they say Twitter uses that too. But yeah, it just shows their culture of also who made it and what they're trying to do with it. I do think music does make people a lot happier. They actually have it on what was it called, VK, but it's different there. It's still very white, and very monotone. It's not like MySpace. Yeah, you could learn a little bit of code. I remember learning some HTML back then in the early 2000s. It was on a game, a funny game about horses, but you could change your website, and it is very cool. Like it would be amazing to bring it back, but I think just a lot of the people that were just kind of like, oh, this cute little robot, like back with Wonder Woman show, or like, what was it, Doctor Who, where the robot's just talking and it's cute. Like kind of what Shane was making now with the compliments and three-way bot chat, because it just picks the biography of the person, the public figure, like say it was with Amber Heard, Tom Cruise, and director Christopher Nolan, and they're just funny, like talking about the thing. It's pretty interesting. It's kind of like going back to the origins of like people just thinking this cute robots, they're talking to me with a personality. But a lot of those people got pushed out for one reason or the other, like money or military or like whatever it was, they got pushed out. And so it's kind of hard to bring back a lot of that kind of origins to it, because a lot of it's very open source. It's like people that really have to, instead of taking a high paying job, they just do this as their passion of their free time. So it requires a culture change of in terms of all that, and understanding that it doesn't always have to be like your profile and that's your social value of the world, like with your reputation management. Like it's just really out of control with that.
There was like something like a wild west element to like I guess the 80s and the 90s when you're looking at the internet, and just well, I guess there's positives and negatives with everything, with every era, Christina. But really quick before I let JK kind of ask his last question, because you sparked something in my head when you're talking about the music and the feelings associated with it. Was there anything that you learned over the past year in terms of the connection between our use of technology and our emotional state? Because I do think, like, even like talking with my nieces, like sometimes they'll get stuck on Instagram or stuck on, TikTok, and like I'll notice like they'll either be super happy or like it'll make them sad, and you're comparing yourself to other people and things like that. Was there anything that you learned about that over the last year?
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at kind of more of the sinister aspect of it when it comes to disinformation operations, and I moved from campaign, like that little silly Medium article, and Adam Waldman sitting there, he's an interesting character. I'd say look into that, but put Winston Churchill, and she's showing Amber Heard blocking him, and I had put Winston Churchill, Americans are last to do something in there, and then I moved from campaign quickly to operation because, or disinformation firms, because of just seeing how complicated it is to try to make someone fall and get destroyed by others or themselves or whatever. It's very intense. Like, you can't look at it, if you're the victim, you just, and you have to know it's synthetic. Otherwise it would destroy you, really, if you thought it was real. They try to astroturf it, but the effects are real, but it's just, the problem is they're not like really, like, you'd have to spend like a year, or it would be less time if you had more people, but really like looking into all of that, and not just keeping it as an internal report in your company or something. You really have to show what people are feeling. Like, not so much like a survey is too slow and you'll never do it, but if you're looking at their postings on their account, and they don't allow people to really get account information, it's like bots or whatever. With Facebook and Instagram are the most locked API ever. Their CrowdTangle API is mainly focused on URLs being shared, which only goes so far. It doesn't show the full operation, really. But you have to go in there and like pick all the comments. There is an API where you can get comments on one profile, but you can't get like a lot of comments on different profiles. So, and then I think you'd have to look at the timing, kind of like when you're doing a timeline study. You have to look at their post before or after, or something, like, or how they react or something, right, before and after. Kind of like what you're doing with social network. When I'm doing social network analysis, is like connecting the timeline, like these peaks and these different accounts are doing this. It's really, really hard because there's so many, but that is what they want in the scientific world. So it's a really high threshold, but someone would have to go in there and research, like, somehow know how to find these people and what they're feeling, and then study it and show, like, are they posting afterwards like unhappy, or what is the effect of the abuse on all these thousands of people? So have a thousands of people data set. Unfortunately, that's just how they are. They just want evidence. So kind of like a court case,
right?
Yeah. Christina, thanks a lot. Again, we went over so many areas, and being a victim in human trafficking, and how this technology can help us create the awareness, and how we can avoid the trap. So those things are not that easy, as you mentioned, that it looks like so complex, and making that data work for us, like to analyze that and get some good out of it. It's a long journey, and we really appreciate you sharing your insights and thoughts.
Yep.
And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come on again, and to see you all a year later. And now I have like the actual data science, but I'll be releasing that GitHub link. If I don't know if you want to add it later, but it should show a lot to people, just like what people can do, and like how detailed it is, and a lot of them will look at those Python notebooks that they have, and I think that'll be very interesting. And even the other part, like showing the video of the bots talking to each other, and how realistic that is, it's very interesting.
Yes,
that actually is public. That link I could send you right now, of him making the compliments in through a bot chat, because he made that public. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we are good to share that as well, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you could add it in the link or something if you want to.
Yeah. Sure, we'll do that.
Awesome. And I was just going to say, again, everybody watching, Christina Taft joined us this week. We thank you so much for your time, Christina. Always good to catch up with you. Anything else you want to let the folks know about, or how they can follow some of the work that you're doing? Because we really appreciate, you stopping by and talking with us this week.
Yeah, so I'm making a GitHub on Rescue Social Tech, which is a website. GitHub is used frequently by technologists, and it's basically the start of coding, putting it all backed up on there and everything. And so that'll have it'll be called Amber Heard Disinformation Operations Bots.
Mhm.
It'll be on there next month. And then this month, Shane Mulligan and Andrew, who also helps us, um, made the positive NLG generation. And he works on semiosis, which is cool. But also really.com is social media for good. It's slow right now, but overall, like we do understand how it works. So we're still out there and everything. So thank you a lot.
No problem. And we definitely will catch up with you in the future. JK, good to speak with you as always, my friend. And I also want to thank the folks out there watching. Again, if you want more information, go to stop-now.org and you can get all that good stuff. JK, anything else you want to say before we tell the folks goodbye?
Thank you, Christina. Again, thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like us. And
yes, we need more likes, all the likes.
Bye for now.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.